The phone rang at 3:04 in the morning. Patton was already awake. He had not slept more than 3 hours in any single night since the German surrender. Not because the war haunted him, though it did in ways he would never admit to another living soul, but because peace terrified him in a way that no Wehrmacht Panzer division ever had. He sat at the edge of his bed in the dark, still dressed. His riding boots were on. His ivory-handled revolvers hung on the bedpost like relics from a church he no longer believed in. Outside, rain moved across the Bavarian hills in slow, indifferent sheets, and somewhere in the distance, a clock in the hallway ticked with the patience of something that had already won. He had known this call was coming. He had known it since the press conference, since the words left his mouth and he watched the reporter's pencils start moving and understood, even then, even in that exact moment, that he had just handed his enemies the knife they had been sharpening for 2 years. He picked up the receiver before the second ring. "Patton?" The voice on the other end was calm, measured, the voice of a man who had learned long ago that calm was its own form of power. "George," said Eisenhower, "we need to talk." There was no preamble, no warmth. Ike never wasted warmth after midnight. "The Secretary of War is calling for your removal," Eisenhower said. "The White House is not pushing back. Congress is not pushing back. You understand what I'm telling you." Patton pressed the receiver hard against his ear. His jaw tightened. Outside, the rain accelerated. "I understand what you're telling me," he said. "What I don't understand is why we're having this conversation at 3 in the morning instead of you telling them all to go to hell." A pause, long enough to mean something. "Because I can't, George." The words dropped into the silence like stones into deep water. Patton stood. He moved to the window. In the glass, he could see his own reflection, older than he expected, thinner in the face, the famous scowl softened by something that looked uncomfortably like exhaustion. He looked at himself the way a man looks at a stranger he is beginning to recognize. "I said what I said," Patton told Eisenhower. "I said the Nazis were like Democrats and Republicans, a political party, an organization. I said denazification was being pushed by people who had never fought a day in their lives and had no idea what they were asking Bavaria to become. I know what you said. I was right." "George," Eisenhower's voice did not rise. It never rose. That was the thing about Ike that had always driven Patton half to madness. The man could deliver a death sentence in the same tone he used to order breakfast. "Being right is not the question in front of us tonight." Patton turned from the window. "Then what is the question?" "The question," Eisenhower said, "is whether I can save your career. And the answer, as of approximately 2 hours ago, is no." There is a particular species of silence that exists only between men who have been through something together that cannot be explained to anyone who wasn't there. Eisenhower and Patton had that silence between them now. They had built it across 3 years and 2 theaters of war, across the deserts of North Africa and the ruins of Sicily and the bocage of Normandy and the frozen forests of the Ardennes, across 1,000 arguments and a handful of moments of genuine, devastating understanding, across the slapping incident that should have ended everything and didn't, across the times Eisenhower had shielded Patton from men in Washington who wanted exactly what was happening right now. Patton sat back down on the edge of the bed. He was 60 years old. His body, which had carried him through 2 world wars and a cavalry charge in Mexico in 1916, had begun to send him messages he did not want to receive. His hands, when he was tired, trembled slightly. He had told no one. "The 5th star," Patton said. Not a question, a reckoning. "That conversation is over," Eisenhower said quietly. "I'm sorry, George. It was over before tonight. Tonight just made it official." Patton closed his eyes. He had wanted that fifth star the way other men want air. Not for vanity, though vanity was there, woven through him like wire through clay. He was honest enough to know it. But because 5 stars meant something specific and permanent. It meant the Army would never fully let you go. It meant you remained a general officer until your death. It meant the war had not been the peak of your life, the tallest thing you would ever be, the moment from which everything else was descent. 5 stars meant the story wasn't over. 4 stars meant it was. "You know what I did," Patton said. His voice had changed. Something in it had dropped away. The performance, the theater, the Patton that appeared in newsreels and on the covers of magazines. What remained was quieter and considerably more dangerous. "You know what I did to get us here. Not just me, all of us. You know what it cost." "I know," Eisenhower said. "Third Army moved faster than any army in the history of warfare. Any army. Caesar's legions, Napoleon's corps. We moved faster and we hit harder, and we did it with less, and we did it across terrain that every staff officer in London told me was impassable." Patton's voice was steady, almost gentle. "I did not do that so politicians in Washington could strip my command because I told the truth about a bureaucratic fantasy at a press conference." "No, you didn't. But that's not the world we're in anymore, George." The rain against the glass, the clock in the hallway. "What world are we in?" Eisenhower took a moment before he answered. When he did, there was something in his voice that Patton had not heard there before. Not sadness, exactly. Something more complicated. "We're in the world that comes after," Eisenhower said. "And you were built for the world before." Patton was quiet for a long time. He thought about Sicily, about the hospital tent where he had slapped a soldier he believed was a coward, and the way the room had gone absolutely still around him, and how he had known in that instant that he had done something that would follow him. He thought about the speech before D-Day, the one where he told his men that Americans love a winner and will not tolerate a loser, and the way they had roared back at him from the mud and the cold. He thought about the bulge, about Christmas Eve 1944, about standing in a courtyard in Luxembourg in the dark and praying out loud, actually out loud to God, for the weather to break so his tanks could move. He thought about the men. He always came back to the men. Tens of thousands of them, buried now in rows so long and straight they looked like sentences in a language the living had not yet learned to read. Men who had followed him into places no sane person would go, because they believed he would get them out the other side. Men who had died believing that. Men who had been right. He thought about what their lives had purchased. And he thought about a press conference in September where he had opened his mouth and said what he believed and handed his enemies the ending they had been waiting to write. "Is there anything to be done?" he asked. "I'm reassigning you," Eisenhower said. 15th Army. It's essentially a historical commission, documenting the war. No combat command, no operational authority." A historical commission. George S. Patton, who had never in his life looked backward if he could look forward, assigned to write down what had already happened. "They want me to write the history?" Patton said. "Yes. Instead of making it?" Eisenhower did not answer that. There was no answer that would have served either of them. Patton looked at his revolvers on the bedpost. He looked at the rain against the glass. He looked at his own hands, which were not trembling now. Whatever else was true about this night, his hands were steady. "You know what the worst part is, Ike?" His voice was almost conversational now, almost light. "Tell me." "The worst part is that I knew. The moment I said it, I knew, and I said it anyway. A long breath. You can't help what you are. Eisenhower's voice, when it came, was the quietest it had been all night. No, he said, you can't. Patton set the receiver down at 4:17 in the morning. He sat in the dark for a while. Then he stood, put on his jacket, and walked downstairs and out into the rain. His driver, asleep in the car, did not wake. The sentries at the gate came to attention but did not speak. He walked alone through the wet Bavarian dark for 20 minutes, not quickly, not with any particular destination, simply moving through the world the way he had always moved through it, as though it owed him something, as though he intended to collect. He would live 36 more days. On December 9th, his staff car would be struck by an army truck on a road outside Mannheim. He would break his neck. He would die in a hospital bed 12 days later without ever returning to American soil, which was perhaps the only way George Patton could have died that made any sense, in Europe, in uniform, far from the peacetime world that had already begun to forget what men like him had cost and what they had purchased. The fifth star never came. It never came because peace has its own politics, and politics has its own casualties, and some men are made so completely for one kind of world that when that world ends, they end with it, whether or not their hearts have yet been told. He walked back to the house as the rain began to ease. He never mentioned the phone call to anyone. Some conversations a soldier keeps private, not because they are shameful, but because some things are too large to be handed over to words that other people could use. He had held a continent in motion with his will. They gave him a desk and asked him to remember it. And the most devastating thing, the thing that followed him into that hospital bed in Heidelberg, the thing that was perhaps the last coherent thought in a mind that had spent 60 years at full velocity, was that he understood why. He understood why, and he went anyway. There is a particular kind of courage that gets no medal. It is the courage of the man who sees clearly what he is about to lose, opens his mouth, and speaks the truth regardless. History calls such men difficult. The men who served under them called them something else entirely.